The submarines of the Regia Marina. What did they get up to during World War II? What did they get up to during World War II? Well, it's rather a lot, actually. Honestly, they were pretty darn busy. And, of course, they were going to be busy because these were submarines from one of the largest submarine fleets prior to World War II. It's funny to think about it. The Italian fleet is one of the largest, arguably the largest in the world, but I always say arguably because it always depends on how you're adding up submarines and what point in the commissioning process you are considering them viable units. And it gets interesting because some nations claim they're viable at a certain point, and other nations claim they're viable at other points, and it just gets a load of fun. But the Regia Marina, they're a good organisation. They really are. And they have a strong navy. They are a strong navy. But saying that, what are we talking about? How many submarines are we talking about? Are we talking about a horde? Do they have 1,000 submarines? No, they have roughly 116 to 115. There are figures which are put it at 110. Pretty much whatever figure you agree on the number of submarines they have roughly 84 operational beginning of the war. And that includes some World War I veteran submarines that they're still using of the H class. Yeah. They managed to keep a consistent 25 to 30 boats at sea pretty much any time across the war out of their fleet, and they do try and increase their number of submarines, but they have even more limitations than the Germans. Mainly because for the Italians, abandoning a balanced force structure and focusing in on one part of their force structure is not really an option. They're fighting in the Mediterranean. There is a difference in the warfare. The Germans can afford to do it because they are fighting a raiding, purely economic warfare scenario for much of their war effort. The Italians are fighting a convoy war. Are fighting for, to at least, control of the sea in certain areas of the Mediterranean. And whilst you can deny sea control with raiding assets and submarines, you cannot achieve sea control with submarines and raiding assets in this period. You can deny it to your opponent, but that isn't the same as you having it. I'd say that's the same still to this day, realistically, because as good as submarines are, you can't use them to escort merchant vessels and large vessels transporting large numbers of troops and protect those vessels, those systems against all spectrum of threats. You probably would, if it's an important enough convoy these days, have a submarine nearby, although considering how few submarines most nations have, it's highly unlikely. But you know, if you want to protect those merchant ships, which is how you demonstrate sea control, because sea control is not just we control the sea, it's we can make use of the sea as we wish. We can move troops, we can move goods, we can move what we need to do hither and thither as we wish, at will. Yeah, you need the surface escorts, you need the surface fighters. But still, it's a good force. They have built a fairly balanced fleet. They've got a fairly decent doctrine. And their doctrine for submarine warfare is not too dissimilar to most powers at the time. They're looking at submarines as assets which can allow them to an extent, block off access to the Mediterranean. They were thinking that they could use them, especially in a war against France, to block the French Atlantic forces from being able to combine with the French Mediterranean forces, giving the Regia Marina an inbuilt superiority in numbers. Because again, there's the classic scenario for the French is that they agreed on the treaty terms to being the same size as the Italians. But they have a massive empire to protect around the world, and they are both in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, and in terms of their national coastlines. The Italians aren't. The Italians are just in the Mediterranean. They can afford to concentrate their forces. Yes, they have Tientsin and they have spaces in Africa, etc., but they are very small parts of their nation, very small pieces of empire, and nothing which is going to demand they deploy major critical assets to them. Although, curiously enough, they do deploy submarines to them. Why? Because, as I've often explained, submarines are in effect, especially in this period, a mobile minefield. They can both lay mines and are the equivalent of a mobile minefield. Wherever they are is an area which you do not want to drive ships through if you can avoid it. You have a chance of hitting a mine, or being hit by a torpedo in this case. You don't want to do it. So submarines are a very good defensive countermeasure. They're a very good defensive security platform for you to put in disparate parts of the world. That being said, what were the big submarines for them? And they do have 3 different types of submarines, broadly speaking. We're going to be talking about a few other subs as we go along, but broadly speaking, they have 3 types of submarine. Type 1 ocean-going are the really big subs, the special ones. Now, the Ranger Marina subs were big. They were some of the largest boats that were available to any navy in the 1920s and 30s, and they were certainly some of the bigger ones in World War II. So why does a nation which lives in the Mediterranean build such big boats? Well, there is a small problem the Italians have, and it's just a small issue. If they want to plug the Straits of Gibraltar, they need to be able to get in and out the Straits of Gibraltar. And they probably need to be able to do it underwater, because doing it surface is not going to be a good look on anyone, and it's probably going to lead to a... how do I put this? A fundamental curtailment of life expectancy. Yes, trying to go through the Gibraltar Straits on the surface is probably going to lead to a fundamental curtailment of life expectancy. Well, how do you deal with that? You go fast on the water. Because with a strong current, usually of about 7 knots coming in from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean, you have to deal with that. You have to be able to go faster than that if you want to be able to get out. And so having a top speed underwater of 7.5 knots, 8 knots, these are of course official top speeds, it's pretty darn useful. Now, the Mameli class were good boats. They were the starting of this program, and they are really the first class to be built, the first proper class, large submarine class to be built after World War One. And they are nice boats. 8 knots underwater top speed. 8 knots. But the batteries do tell you a story, because they can do 110 nautical miles at 3 knots underwater. Which is not so good. Whereas when we start looking at some of the old, more, how do I put this, later submarines, things like Luisi and the Marchini class, well, those vessels, they can do 8.2 knots underwater. But they can do, still, only 110 nautical miles at 3 knots officially. But this is also one of the reasons why Italian boats could go and assist the Germans in the Atlantic and could still return home to Italy and be perfectly useful. Yet, German boats, if they went to try and fight in the Mediterranean, couldn't usually get out again. Because they didn't have the underwater speed to fight the current. They couldn't fight the current. Now, Then we have the Type 2 coastal boats. I would say these are more the vessels designed with the likely scenario of fighting in the Mediterranean in mind. Especially the inshore and littoral waters of the Mediterranean, which are pretty expansive. They are smaller, but they are just as lethal. Just as lethal and just as capable. But there are some other differences about them. They carry much less in the way of extended supplies, despite the fact that they still have a top speed of 8 knots underwater, mostly. They are still designed to be able to get through the Straits of Gibraltar. If the Italians could have designed a submarine which could pass undetected through the Suez Canal, they would have done. As it was, they couldn't do that. But the Straits of Gibraltar, the Dardanelles Straits, that they could do. And that they did do. Because those were useful bodies of water they could get through. Useful bodies of water. What always interests me, though, about their design of their boats is how much is similar between the large and the smaller boats. The large vessels, well, for example, the Louise, their submerged displacement was 1,500 tons. In comparison to that, the Adua class's underwater displacement was 858 tons. Just over half. Just over half. And there's a purpose for that. These submarines are also about vessels which can be based in places where they need to be based. One reason is for the smaller submarines, the advantages of them, is that you can put them in riskier Mediterranean waters. But it also means they do take more risk. And there is a reason why, if you go through the Adua class especially, you'll find that Adua herself is sunk by HMS Gurkha and HMS Legion in 1941. Gurkha was the L-class vessel, not the tribal vessel. That had already been lost by that point. Asingani was attacked by Leforian Eclipse, which caused her to scuttle near Sicily in July 1943. Dagobah was trying to attack the Royal Navy during Operation Pedestal, but unfortunately ran into HMS Wolverine, and she was a Wolverine. Durbo was just east of Gibraltar, just east of Gibraltar, not west, just east of Gibraltar, and was scuttled after Firedrake and Wrestler decided they were going to beat her up because they caught her where she was trying to get through the funnel. Gondar was scuttled near Alexandria on the 3rd of September 1940 after HMAS Stuart, HMS Diamond, and Sunderland flying boats had been pretty much tormenting her for 14 hours. They hadn't managed to land a killing blow, but she wasn't going anywhere. Le Fall sunk 20th October 1940, North Miller by HMS Gallant, Hotspur and Griffin. Again, Royal Navy destroyers doing Royal Navy destroyer things. Macaulay had been assigned to the Red Sea flotilla, but she ran aground on the 15th of June 1940 when the crew, were disabled by a chloromethane leak in the ship's air conditioning system. Central nervous system poisoning is what it causes. Nengeli was sunk by HMS Greyhound. Scree was sunk by Her Majesty's trawler Islay. Tenbian was sunk by the H-class destroyer HMS not H-class destroyer. Dido-class light cruiser HMS Hermione. Sorry, I knew one was sunk by a destroyer, but by a cruiser. I was just going. Hermione's such an H-class name. That must be a destroyer. No, no, that was of course that is a Dido class. Yes, a Royal Navy cruiser sunk an Italian submarine. Urask was sunk by HMS Petard along with Valisa Olga, the Greeks getting something in the 15th December 1942. And Ubeki Sigeli was sunk by HMS Dainty and HMS Ilex in 29th of June 1940. In fact, of that class, the Agio class, 17 were completed. 16 were lost. That's the thing about the Italians, which is often forgotten. They were fighting the whole way through the war against a concerted, heavy fleet effort for ASW warfare. We think about the trouble the Germans faced. Well, one of the advantages they had was it was quite spread out. But every time the British are running a convoy, a big convoy through the Mediterranean, or doing a fleet force, those are, compared to the convoys crisscrossing the Atlantic, rather concentrated centres of assets, with lots of force around them. Lots of force of very highly trained ASW warfare professionals. And so, despite the Italian submarines being pretty darn decent, they didn't manage to achieve much. But they kept on fighting. And this video, basically, I'm doing an introduction to them before the Shameless Book Plug, and then we'll talk about their service after the Shameless Book Plug. With all that's been said so far about their strategy, their plan for operations, the fact that they want to be able to control at will the access points to the Mediterranean so they can define the combat space, you'd think mine-laying submarines would be something they would be really keen on. I'm not talking about the ability to carry a few mines on any submarine and every submarine. That's always a useful skill to have, a useful capability. I'm talking about actual dedicated mine-laying submarines. Actual dedicated mine-laying submarines. Yeah, they have just 6 of them. 6 boats. 1929 to 1930, they built one. They built a couple. They built one more in 1935, another 3 between 1937 and 38. Yeah, good boats. Especially the last class, the fuckers. Got a plan up above them. They could have 6 21-inch torpedo tubes, 4 in the bow, 2 stern. A single 100mm gun, 2 twin 13.2mm AA guns, and 36 mines. They had a top speed underwater of 7.4 knots, 15.2 knots on the surface, and a fairly decent range. They displace 1,650 tons submerged. That's some of the largest submarines in Italian service. They are capable boats. They really are, but yeah, they really weren't something, considering all the things the Italians get up to in the war, the chariots, that's the human torpedoes, and various other systems they come up with. Their mine-laying submarines get so little love. So little love, and not really as much use. Fokker herself, well, she's lost in 1940, October 1940, while laying mines off Haifa. Unknown causes is the phrase, but there is also the possibility that the, how do I put this politely, the defensive minefield and the offensive minefield overlap somewhat, and that caused confusion. That is a probable possibility, sadly enough, because that happened to a lot of submarines in World War II. Other option, sadly enough, is that one of its own mines blew up. Yes, we talk about Italian issues with quality control and how that can affect their shells. They can also have issues with their own mines, especially the submarine launch variety. But again, there aren't that many of them, and so the sample size is kind of small. And how many they're building as well makes them more of a cottage industry than a factory asset in terms of military procurement, in terms of naval procurement. If you're laying thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of mines, you have quality control issues, you will be fixing them. If you are laying dozens of mines, maybe low hundreds of mines, and Reggie doesn't always get the connectors quite right. It passes, but it's okay, but it's not quite right. Well, how many people are employed to check up on Reggie to keep quiet? How many people are going to be watching? And it's the same with other nations. Please don't get me wrong. There is nothing unique about the Italian cottage industries versus anyone else's. It's the same all the world over. The quality control specialists and the money for the number of team members required goes to the thing you are building the most of. The thing which you are building, which is a niche capability you quite like to use, tends to get ignored. It's just the way of the world. With that being said, it's shameless book plug time. Before we get into what they're actually doing in terms of fleet operations. So shameless book plug. The chance I get to say thank you to you all for supporting the channel, for you liking, sharing, subscribing, doing everything which helps the channel grow. For, more importantly, for you making sure that little bell down there that says next to the subscribe button is filled in. Because a filled in bell means you're told about all my videos. An open bell, which is just an outline, that means YouTube gets to decide what videos you watch. That's a really important thing, and it's something which I think YouTubers like me are going to have to start pushing up, because YouTube likes to spread around people's watching. They like to spread you around the algorithm, and I can understand that. Why? That works for them. It keeps you watching longer, it gives you more content, it's broader, it's greater. But for people who depend on YouTube in some ways, in my case, it funds my research. It funds all the naval history work I get to do because I'm a contract lecturer, and in a nice way, contract lecturers don't get research funding in any way, shape, or form. We only get given a permanent post if we do enough research to, help us get into the interviews for the regular roles. But they don't fund us when we're contract lecturers. Anyway, I'm getting a bit old, so I don't think I'll ever get one of those permanent posts. But we'll see. We will see. I'll keep applying. Maybe I should start applying for the level above. Who knows? But leaving that to one side, way I'm not stopping the YouTube channel. Oh, of course, I like it too much. I like talking with you all too much. But realistically, I have watched as they've modified the subscribe system. These things have come in, and slowly it has been ramped up. Slowly it has started to have an impact. And you look at you look at your returning viewers and you're going, why am I getting less, and why are my returning viewers getting less and less? That I had it constant for so long. Why is it getting less? Not in terms of percentage, in terms of real terms. And they're all subscribed. The subscriber numbers are going up. And the answer is, have that bell. If it's filled in, you'll get told every single time I put a video, so you get to choose whether you watch my video or not. If it's an outline, the algorithm is going to choose whether it thinks you'll like the video or not. And then there's a level of, if you don't actually want to watch that video, then you don't watch that video. So you could have missed a video you would have liked to watch, but the algorithm decided you didn't. So I lose that chance of you watching one of my videos. and I then lose the chance again because maybe the algorithm's picked out a video you don't actually feel like watching. It's just cruelty to Alex as far as I'm concerned, but it's cruelty to all YouTubers. So if you like a YouTuber, if you want to support their channel, and if you enjoy sometimes seeing topics which they produce which are slightly out of or outside your normal watching, your normal interest, or outside your what the algorithms defined as your algorithmic echo chamber, then make sure you have filled in bells for those you want to see. Make sure you got filled in bells. With that being said, let's talk about what the Italian subs get up to in the Mediterranean. Now, the interesting thing about the Mediterranean is that there is really so little there. The Germans send U-boats and other things to assist the Italians, but honestly, the Mediterranean is not the bustling hub it normally is. By any rights, it's usually thronging in peacetime with a sea full, quite literally using a sea full, of shipping going back and forwards. If you go and look on the international trade maps, if you go look at the Earth at night pictures, some of the really detailed ones that can see down to the level of things like shipping lights, and I'll pick up the number of lights concentrated by ship, will show you bands of lights going through the Mediterranean because there is just that many ships passing through there. But war happens, and for some reason the British go, you know what, we can send everything around Africa. And most other people trading the world go, you know, I'd rather not go through the Mediterranean. Why? The British and the Italians are literally blitzing it up in the middle of it because the Italians are trying to supply the North African campaign, and the British are also doing campaigns supporting North Africa, and they're literally convoy battles where the convoys run into each other and are fighting each other as one's trying to go north or south, the other one's trying to go east or west. It's a whole special war. So the main targets become trying to take out the naval vessels for each nation. And to be honest, the Italian submarine force achieves 21 merchant vessels and 13 warships sunk. Now, part of that is also due to the fact that they were deploying a doctrine at the beginning of war of static patrols, and you fired one or two torpedoes to an attack, you didn't fire a full spread, and that was corrected in 1942, and one of the reasons why Operation Pedestal was as hard as it was, and why quite so many of so much of that tonnage is actually to do with Operation Pedestal and Harpoon. They found that they were mostly dealing with warships and large numbers of them. And your problem is that the Royal Navy warships, they zigzag so often we're fairly sure they can't even sleep in a straight line. Royal Navy ships, basically war starts and they start zigzagging and it don't stop. It just don't stop. Secondly, they like to modulate their speed while they're zigzagging. And thirdly, pretty much every ship in the Royal Navy, thanks to Abaco, Cressy and Hogue, as I've talked about before on many parts of the channel, has at least a hydrophonic system, if not full-on Aztec. As I've already mentioned in this video, some Royal Navy cruisers actually hunt successfully submarines. Yes, it was that as a Dido class. Yes, it was called Hermione. Yes, I'm fairly sure it's very appropriate that a Harry Potter character is named after that ship, and I will forever believe a Harry Potter character is named after that ship because it fits with the profile of the ship. A smart, very inventive, and slightly unusual lady. It works well. But the thing is, you look at other navies and go, so how many of your cruisers have been hunting submarines successfully? And look at you and go, why would our cruisers be able to hunt submarines? Well, pretty much, I have decided that the reason Royal Navy cruisers were hunting submarines as much as they did, even though they weren't really supposed to be in World War II, the whole point of them having the gear was they were supposed to get away from the cruisers, not go hunting them, was because those cruisers were trying to make up for World War One, where they lost a lot of their numbers to submarines, and unlike the battleships, they didn't put anything up on their side of the scoreboard. The battleships got it in. HMS Dreadnought, her one only kill was a submarine. So, the cruisers were just looking at the battleships and probably Warspite was gloating. We can all imagine Warspite gloating. But honestly, for submarine warfare, the Mediterranean was brutal. It's where the Italians both had their most boats and tried to use them as hard as they could, but where, thanks to a combination of many things, despite having good technology, they had a very outdated tactics in terms of how they adapted patrol areas and how they coordinated their force. But that, to an extent, reflected their communications ability and their ability to command and control and coordinate with their submarines at sea. When they start using them more aggressively around Operation Pedestal and Harpoon, they cause a huge amount of trouble for the Allies. That, of course, is Operation Pedestal and Harpoon, and that particular fun year of trying to resupply Malta. But still, as hard as they fought, and as many problems as they put in their own way, and one of the problems is the high command they're dealing with. It's a curious thing, but the amount of people who invest, nations who have a history of investing in advanced systems and then completely don't bother to apply themselves into how they're actually going to use them. They have a concept of operations, but the tactics don't match. It's a constant refrain in history. It's almost a meme. It happens so constantly. Well, in this scenario, this was also the place where they lost the most boats. As said, they only achieved roughly 100,000 tons of sinking. Which is not good. Not good at all. Especially when you consider this theatre, where they usually had roughly 30 boats, and withdrew quite a few of those at several points, they achieved over 500,000 tons of hitting. 500,000 tons sunk. Now again, this is where I would say their tactics do stand them in their worst stead, because the Mediterranean, you can set up the patrol areas and there is very little room for manoeuvre, and you can go through. And you're dealing with warships as well, which are manoeuvring, relying on speed a bit, and they're avoiding air power as well. So there are enough factors in that you can sort of box in an enemy naval force and force them to go through at least one of your patrol areas. The Atlantic, you've got no such advantages. And you have a Royal Navy which is happily playing keep away. And I know people often put this down to breaking Enigma, but it isn't. It's more signals traffic analysis. It's where's the radio noise coming from in the Middle Atlantic? Where's broadcasting? What's the volume of broadcast? How many broadcasts are going out? Okay, there's something going down. They feel they're close to something. Scatter. Or maneuver. Or whatever you want to issue to the convoys, you issue to the convoys as a command. Once you break the Enigma, you have even more advantages and even more detail, but signals traffic analysis, that was doing that. There's a reason why we know about Enigma. That was very useful. That all bit of history, Bletchley Clarke being released, set everyone aflame and thinking about World War II intelligence and electronic warfare intelligence has now come all about cracking codes. And the signals traffic analysis stuff, which we know went on for longer, which is still kept secret. The methodologies and algorithms and other things being used for analysis are still under wraps. It's so conveniently forgotten by the side of this sexy story of Enigma. But I am, of course, a historian, not a professional cynic. The two might be closely related, but they're not. They're not the same. When it comes to Betasum, or the Bordeaux Submergible, or Submergibly? Submergibi? I cannot pronounce that. I can get some Italian due to my learning Latin at school, but that word, no matter how many times I listen to the system, and no matter how many times I try and get a pronouncer, Submergibly? Submergibly? Ghibli? Ghibli? I cannot pronounce it properly. I do apologise. Basically, it's the Bordeaux base where they establish themselves and operate from. And they do a lot of work from there. They have troops there to defend them. They have roughly 1,600 personnel based there. They have a postal system. And the Italians were very, very protective of their operational capabilities there. Very protective of their capabilities there. It had dry docks, it had basins, it had locks. They even managed to establish at La Palisse in La Rochelle a second base, which had facilities to allow for submerged training, which wasn't possible at Bordeaux. What are they doing? Well, they're patrolling off the Canary Islands, they are patrolling off the Azores, they are manoeuvring into the northwestern approaches. To be fair, the Germans are reluctant allies to the Italians at times. Donitz sees the Italians as inexperienced, but useful. And they could gain expertise. Donitz actually liked their boats. He liked their boats. He felt the crews weren't in a great condition, and he felt the high command didn't understand how to use them, but he liked the boats. They tried to do a lot. They had to build up experience, and especially with the Atlantic weather conditions, they were facing issues. They'd usually use the Atlantic as somewhere they went out and visited and then came home and weren't out there for long times. Remember, their African colonies and their China sort of territory, they were all through the Indian Ocean. They go out to Suez. They had maintained the capability to go through Gibraltar, through the Strait of Gibraltar. That had been a critical capability for them. It hadn't necessarily been a well-practiced capability. And they do their best. They do display a land, and as time goes on, they manage to sink more and more vessels. They become more and more part of the campaigning force. In fact, there are aces, you know. Gianfranco Gazzana Piragogia, I think, sunk over 90,000 gross register tons. Carlo Feccia de Cosada, 96,000 gross registered tons. Priagani's boat, the Leonardo da Vinci, was the top non-German scoring submarine of the Axis forces of World War II, sinking 17 ships, totaling 120,000 gross registered tons. Now, the thing is, the Germans had a lot more opportunity and a lot more support to achieve these operations because they often were involved in Wolfpack operations, and the Italians didn't really get to do that. The Italians didn't really get the chance to be used that way. They achieved good results, though, for their operations, and again, the interesting thing is I usually compare the Italian operations and the British operations because for different reasons they have similar restricted environments. And if we consider the Royal Navy's best submarine in the Mediterranean, HMS Upholder, accounted for 120,000 gross registered tons, I think the success rate of the Italians in the Atlantic certainly adds up. Certainly does add up. There was also some interesting personalities in them, in that Salvatore Todaro, who was an Italian officer, submarine commander, who had a habit of towing lifeboats to safety. If he sank a ship vessel where there was going to be no safety, it was going to be in danger, he had a habit of towing them to safety. He was a very honourable commanding officer. Very brave one, considering those rates. There's a phrase which sometimes goes around when we're talking about submarine performance in World War II. It's called exchange rates. It's gross tonnage sunk divided by the number of submarines lost. If we consider the operations in the Atlantic, the Germans achieve 40,000, well, 40,500 something, nearly 600 tons, 40,600 tons for the German units, and the Italians 34,500 tons for them. But the thing is, when you look at the actual numbers the average submarine does, I would say it's far more even spread across the Italian force than is the German force. The German force have some aces who do spectacularly well. And some submarines which, well, let's be honest, it's statistically going to be the case. They're committing over 1,000 boats at various points, what they're aiming for. They will produce tons of boats throughout the war. They will very rarely have as many operational as they wish. But the fact is, Italian submarines in the Atlantic sank 109 merchant ships and lost 16 boats for it. They took 600,000 tons of Allied shipping with them and lives. And mostly they kept to their traditional techniques. They did. Then we have the Indian Ocean, which starts out as the Red Sea Squadron. Okay, it starts out as the Red Sea Flotilla. In the first half of 1940, in fact, for the vast majority of 1940, in terms of numbers of actions, it is the Italians which make World War II a world war, because they're the only ones doing anything outside of Europe that's requiring attention. And it's the Royal Navy and the Italians basically going backwards and forwards over the Indian Ocean. But the problem is they're plagued by various issues from the beginning. 8 Italian submarines start off World War II in the Indian Ocean. They are on patrol as part of the Red Sea Flotilla. And they are good boats. They are good boats. But they have a small issue. Just a small issue. It's minor, really. It's something which we should all, just overlook and be nice to them over. Their chloromethane air conditioning refrigerants caused, leaking. And this caused central nervous system poisoning of the crews when they were recirculating air during submerged operations. Just a small issue. Just a small problem. They also started a curious exchange rate with the Royal Navy, in that Galileo Galilei sank the tanker James Stove, but then was captured by the British naval trawler Moonstone. A good little trawler. The Torricelli sank HMS Khartoum, a destroyer. But of course, being a destroyer, she was in company with other destroyers, who promptly went, well, hang on, you're here, you're ours. You're starting to see a problem lining up here, and this is basically what played out in the Mediterranean. And then the Galvani sank the Indian naval sloop, the Pathan, before HMS Falmouth, another sloop, basically sunk her. This is the problem when you're engaging in such a war, when you're using such vessels to sink such vessels. You might, with ambush and advantage, get a kill. You might do that. But that's only going to help you so much, because if the other warships are around and free, they're going to come in on you. And the ultimate problem is this. Was it more difficult for the Royal Navy to replace a sloop, or for the Italian Navy, the Regia Marina, to replace a submarine? And think about this. Most of the crew of the sloop survive. They can recover them. The crew of the submarine, they're gone. Even if they do survive, they're captured. Submarines are an incredibly powerful and potent weapon. But they operate best, and most successfully, when they're part of an overall force structure which is able to support them. And where they are able to deploy their assets and then withdraw. They are ambush predators. They need to pounce and withdraw. Because the moment they are not able to withdraw, like any raider, like any ambush predator, they suddenly have a very much a glass jaw. They really do. And this is the same to this day. The moment a submarine fires its torpedoes, yeah, you can have them motor in slow and quiet, those torpedoes, and then they go fast, and that can give you time to try and get away. But that means you also, if you want to pull away, you have to cut your wires. If they're wire guided, which means all sorts of things could happen. And whilst you theoretically have a range of 30 nautical miles at that, does anyone like to fire their weapons at maximum range? Anyone? Not really. You want to give them room to play. You want to give them room to maneuver. It's the same in this period. Look at the distances submarines actually fire their torpedoes at, and then consider their maximum ranges. Italians have fairly decent torpedoes by all accounts. They have some problems with some things, but to be fair, a lot of them were based in very much tried and tested technology, so they should have been reliable and worked. That's what they've been built to do. After this initial period and withdrawal from the Indian Ocean, once you have the Monsoon Gruppe being set up, well, the Italians are some of the first to get vessels out to Penang in cargo configuration to support the setting up of these facilities. The Tazzoloni, the Barbarigo, the Commandante Capelli all make the journeys, including the Giuliani. She's actually sent out in May 1943, reaches Singapore in August 1943. And some of these vessels were still going after Italy changed sides in the war. Mostly because they were taken over by the Germans. The Capelli, well, when she arrived, she could carry 160 tons of mercury, aluminium, welding steel, 20mm guns, bomb examples, bomb sites, tank blueprints, ammunition, and she reaches Singapore in July 1943. These are useful assets. Admittedly, they are testimony to why the Royal Navy was quite so keen to keep sticking up mines outside Singapore, if we consider that the I-30, which being one of the first ones, and a Japanese submarine that done the route, actually struck a mine and sunk off Singapore when she was loaded with radar, Metox hydrophones arrays, Metox and hydrophones, Enigma machines, and sonar countermeasure charges, etc. things, and a torpedo data computer as well. The German torpedoes have probably been less interesting to the Japanese than the Italian torpedoes. They quite like the Italian ones. But the thing is, by the time the Monsoon Gruppe is realistically working, The Italians are in armistice. And the Italian boats which are out there are either captured by the Japanese and put into joint Italian-German operation with Italian-German crews, or are the cargo ships which have been seized by the Germans, cargo boats. Converting some of their larger submarines to do this cargo duties was probably sensible, but it was a bit sad. And then we have the Far East, the Pacific. What were the Italians doing up there? Well, some of their boats did get out technically to the area, but they really weren't going far. They really didn't do a lot. Indian Ocean was one thing. But once you're going further than that, once you're taking the Regia Marina into the South China Sea and maybe even the Pacific, you have issues. You have issues for them. They have been operating out Tinson, but the base there had auxiliary vessels, things like a mine layer and a gunboat, to support their operations in China. But honestly, the only submarines which get that far are their supply submarines. They want to do more. The Italians could have done more, and I think this is another legacy of those things of the Washington Naval Treaties and the London Naval Treaty as well, First London. I think if it hadn't been for First London, I could honestly see there being some very interesting cruiser and destroyer designs and very interesting submarine numbers amongst the powers. And I do wonder if First London, by seeking a cap on those vessels as well as on carriers and capital ships, didn't cause even more damage and take it even more foolishly. There has often been my mind that First London does more to lead the world to weakness and to the folly of such massive war than Washington by a goodly margin. Washington Treaty comes after First World War, and they're already going to be cutting ships anyway. Their programs were going to be worked down. Everyone was going to do it, and everyone did do it. It just allowed an excuse to stop any new construction and just keep all the ships going. But First London is wanton destruction of capability. It truly is. It truly is. And so let's consider. These are the heads of the Italian Naval Submarine Service. Mario Falangola, 1935 to 1941, December. And Antonio Lejani, December 1941 to September 1943. Both of these officers choose to go to the Italian Social Republic, so they choose to stay loyal to the fascist regime. And honestly, with both these officers, a lot of the issues, the doctrinal moribundness of the doctrinal development of Italy and its submarine force, and the systems which underpin and support the submarines, the communications and other things, does lie with them. It does lie with them. But there again, if you want an example of why you shouldn't pick admirals for their political inclination rather than their intelligence, both of them joined the Italian Social Republic. At that point in the war, you've got America in the war. You've got all sorts of things happening. The vast majority of the Navy has sided with the government and the armistice. And you're gonna pick the ISR. One of them managed to lose 2 sons to partisans. The other one dies in a car accident in October 1943. That was providential. It's a strange thing when you're looking at the Italian Navy. They managed to build at some point, some of the most balanced and organized force, and some of the most finest technology. And yet, strategically, a lot of their senior officers are stuffed shirts, to use that old expression. They really are. It sometimes strikes you, and I've talked about certain officers in the Italian Navy who did form plans for the Italian Navy. I did a whole video about some of their chiefs of staff, and some of them are really, really smart. And sometimes I think what happened was those officers left behind a roadmap. And the ones who came after followed that roadmap in their recommendations to Il Duce. And so what they build is a sensible force. But the people who are building it don't understand why they're building it, really, and therefore, because they don't understand why they're building it, they don't understand how to use it. That would certainly explain a lot for the Italian warfighting machine. Because you have a generation below them who have not been affected as much by the politicization of the armed forces. And they prove excellent. There are captains and commanders who rise up in the Italian ranks, and they deliver some startlingly good performances when you compare them to the officers above them. Not startling good because they're the Italian Navy, so it must be terrible. But no, it's when you look in the officers above them and going, so that's the level below you, and they're able to do that and work out all of this and put it all together. And yet, you at the top are... Now, we could say, well, they are proud patriots. They believe in the success of the fascist regime. They believe it has restored honor to Italy. But the first thing you want as an admiral, is someone who will see the world as it is and devise plans to make it as it needs to be. That is the first mission. And if you are, for want of a better word, infected with an ideology, you cannot by definition see the world as it is, because you are seeing the world through the prism of your ideology. You are seeing the world through the prism of your ideology. And that's the reality for them, really. They don't see the world as it is. They see the world as they wish it to be. As they want it to be. As they think it should be. With that being said, what's the question? Because this was a Patreon premiere on a Thursday, because I added an extra scuttlebutt in on a Wednesday. And because I'm currently wandering around, so there's no live this Thursday, unlike normal. I might be on Discord later. It's going to depend. I hope you don't mind if I've managed to find someone nice to have dinner with. I'll be having dinner with someone nice rather than sitting in my hotel room on Discord. But, maybe I'll still be on this. I'll pop in Discord a bit. What's today's question? Well, there's an interesting point. Can the Italians really change things if they go offensively aggressive from the get-go with their submarines in World War II? The argument goes, well, look at what they achieved at Pedestal. Yes, but look at the losses they achieved getting it. Look at the situation. Well, after they step up the aggression around Pedestal, look at how the losses mount on their submarine force. It's when you realize that almost half the losses of the Italian submarine force takes place 1942 onwards. Almost half the losses. take place, and I would argue the change is realistically February 1942 onwards to September 1943. So they've been in war since 1940. And the losses, the vessels they lose in that period, are often the ones being headed by some of the most aggressive and capable officers. So yeah, aggression can give you bigger results, but if you can't replace the boats and you're losing them more quickly because you're taking more chances to be aggressive, does that really help you? I'll be interested to see what you all think. For what coming up? Well, after this video comes out, we have got a blank because I'm being quiet until that goes live about what that's going to be. If I do my work right, it'll be recorded on Monday the 14th, and then it will be out on the 15th. If I've done it right. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Take care, and if you like the video, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. And remember, if you subscribe, go look at those bells and decide what you want. Do you want YouTube to pick what videos you see, or do you want to pick what videos you see? That's up to you. You have the power.